What words would you use to describe our world right now? Think about that for a minute. What words would you use to describe what's happening in our world? What words come to mind? Maybe crazy, out of control, violent, death, divisive. How would you describe the world right now? Let's zoom in a little bit. How would you describe your life right now? What words would you use to describe your life, your circumstances, what you're going through right now? Maybe it's the same words. Maybe you would come up with other words like chaotic, busy, stressful, sleepless, full of tension. How would you describe your life right now? Now, my guess is the words that you thought of, whether it be for the world as a whole or for your life, one of the words was likely not peaceful. Unless you're on vacation and you're watching this from the beach, which what are you doing? Get back to the beach. Unless that's you right now, my guess is you probably wouldn't describe your life as peaceful. Maybe in pieces, but certainly not peaceful. And when you look at the world around us, you probably wouldn't think, man, what a peaceful world. I mean, we like this idea of peace, but it just seems impossible. Seems like a good thing to shoot for, but something that will never quite get there. And today we're going to be looking at the second to last beatitude in the series that we've been in for the past 6 or so weeks, and it's going to talk about this idea of peace. Jesus is going to talk about peace. And if you're like me, you're going to think, man, that sounds great. Sounds like a good idea. I just don't think it's possible. Not for me, not in this world, not in this culture, not in this society. It just doesn't seem possible. But the reality is our world today isn't so different than the world that Jesus was speaking in 2,000 years ago. You see, Jesus was speaking to an audience, a culture, a people that were occupied by their enemies, the Romans. Their world was full of violence. It was divided, it was divisive. People didn't agree on things. It really wasn't so much different than the world we find ourselves in today. And I don't think it's coincidence that Jesus chooses to end the Beatitudes with this idea of peace and this other idea that we're going to look at next week that's closely tied to peace. And I think these last 2 weeks that we're going to look at are going to be some of the biggest challenges and some of the most difficult things to live out. But I think if we do, I think if we lean in and hear what Jesus has to say, I think these last 2 weeks could also change our lives and our faith. Because while they're challenging, they can also make a large impact in how we view life. And I think the reality is, even though we think peace is out of reach, I think that's what we want, isn't it? We want a peaceful life. And the more chaotic, the more stressful, the more divisive our life gets, the more we want a peaceful life. 6 months ago, my wife and I, we left our comfortable jobs and we moved from Virginia back to Colorado, where we both grew up, to plant a church. And listen, the past 6 months have been anything but peaceful. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've wanted peace, but it's been challenging, it's been stressful, it's been difficult. And there's some days that peace seems like the furthest thing possible. I mean, our house is filled with more tension than peace. A better way to describe our life would be worry or fear or stress, not peace. Seems like a good idea, but sometimes I just don't know how to get there. And maybe that's you too. Maybe you and your life and what's happening, the stress and the anxiety, you look at this concept of peace and you're like, man, I wish I could have peace. I wish I was at peace, but I just don't know how to get there. And here's my challenge for you. As we look at this next beatitude in Matthew chapter 5, is to keep an open mind. Because peace isn't just a good idea. is something that Jesus has for you, is something he can provide for you. So don't write it off as just a good idea, but actually maybe take a step into what God has for you. Let's jump in. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. It says this, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are the peacemakers. You see, the world that Jesus was in, there's a lot of differences between the world 2,000 years ago and the world now, but the lack of peace might be one of the biggest unifying factors between their world and our world. We both live in worlds that are divided and divisive and stressful and full of tension, and it's in these worlds that Jesus is saying, blessed are the peacemakers. And when Jesus says this world peace, he's saying this, one who has received the peace of God and who takes the peace of God to those in their life. Not simply one who makes peace, but one who gives the peace that God has given them. And there's two parts that we need to look at in this. The first one is what we're more familiar with. It's bringing peace to the world, being peacemakers. And what does it actually mean to be a peacemaker in a chaotic world? And we'll look at that in a little bit. But first, what I want to look at is how we can have peace with God. Because we can't bring the peace of God if we don't have the peace of God. So how can we get the peace of God in our lives? And for that, I want to look at Romans chapter 5, verse 1. And Paul says this, Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, the word justified is a legal term. It means to be declared righteous by a judge. And in this case, our judge is God. You see, because of our sin, because of what we've done, we've created a divide between us and God, and a penalty, a price has to be paid. And so we have two options. We have two deals. We can pay the price ourselves, which is death, or we can accept what Jesus has done for us on the cross. The choice is ours. We can pay the price, or Jesus is going to pay the price, but somebody has to pay the price. And what Paul is saying in Romans chapter 5 is that when we place our faith, when we place our trust, when we submit to the kinghood of Jesus, we are justified by our faith. We are declared righteous. We no longer have to pay the price for our sins. Jesus has paid the price for us. And when that happens, we can have peace. You see, before Jesus made that sacrifice for us, we were at odds with God, not because of anything he did, but because of us. Our sin had created a divide between us. But Jesus closed that and brought peace. And now we live on this side of the cross. We have Romans 5 to look back on, but Jesus' audience, when he first said these words, that we can be at peace with God, that we are called to be peacemakers, this would have rocked the world. They would have been thinking, how can I have peace with God? I mean, that sounds great, but how do I have peace with God? How is that even possible? Because for their whole life, maybe this sounds familiar to you, they were taught that in order to get from God, in order to enter peace with God, they had to do enough good to outweigh their bad. They had to stop doing all this bad stuff and start doing all this good stuff. And that teaching was weighing them down. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you are there. People who are listening would have felt this pressure to fix themselves, to do the justification themselves. And the main problem with this teaching is it really leads to one of two places. It either leads to arrogance or despair. Arrogance, which is because I think I'm doing such a good job, at least compared to you, I'm better than you, or despair. I'm doing such a terrible job, especially compared to you. And what Jesus is doing, he comes along, he says, no, there's actually a better way to live. Peace with God is found in me and by what I do. I've done the heavy lifting for you. I've paid the price for you. So now you can live at peace with me. See, Jesus has done for us what we could never do for ourselves. He's made peace between us and God, and he's leading people into this peace, and it's a peace that changes everything. See, Jesus isn't just calling us to be peacemakers. He's calling us to embody this peace that he's given to us and then take that same peace to those around us. You can't give away what you do not have. And so an important step is if you want to be a peacemaker first, you have to accept, you have to take this peace that God has given you so that you can give it to the world around you. And Jesus even goes so far as to say this, that when we do this, we shall be called sons of God. Peacemakers shall be called sons of God. Now, this isn't just a statement of relationship, but it's a statement of character. You see, in Jesus' day, when you were called a son of a fill in the blank, they were saying that you acted that way, that you were embodying the character of that person or that thing. So, for example, if you called somebody in Jesus' day a son of a dog, you weren't saying that they were literally a son of a dog. You were saying that they acted like a dog. And listen, in Jesus' day, dogs weren't these little cute animals that we brought into our house and we put sweaters on them, we push them around in strollers. I mean, if you're looking for a way that our society has lost their minds, look no further than how we treat our pets. You see, in Jesus' day, dogs were scavengers. They're mean. They bite you. You'd kick them. You left them outside. They were one of the lowest animals on the totem pole. And so when you called somebody a son of a dog, you're saying they acted like that. They were worthless. They deserved to be left outside, that they bit people. They were angry. You were describing their character. And so when Jesus says that we are sons of God when we bring peace, he's saying that we're embodying the character of God. But he's also saying something about God's character. He's saying that God is a peacemaker. God is a peacemaker. It's in his character. It's who he is. And for the crowd listening, when they heard Son of God, that was something incredible, something that today might seem commonplace, but still, this might be one of the craziest things that Jesus ever said, that when we bring peace, when we take the peace God has given us and we share it with the world around us, we are being in the same character as God. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know many people who do that. I don't know many people who are bringing peace to the world around them. I don't know many people who are living at peace. Now, I know plenty of people who are stressed, who are anxious, who are angry, who are divided. I know plenty of people who are throwing fuel on the fire, but I don't know many people who are at peace, who are bringing peace to the world around them. You see, Jesus is saying the good life is found in those who take on the peace of God and who give it back out to those around them. He's saying the blessed life, the good life is found when we are peacemakers. And in a world full of fighters and arguers and hotheads, followers of Jesus are called to play by a different set of rules. We're called to be peacemakers. But it's something we struggle with. And I think I know why. I think we struggle to be peacemakers because when we strive to bring peace to the world around us, we take shots, right? Peacemakers often get hit. I don't know if you've ever witnessed a fist fight, but typically what happens when two people start fighting is a third person eventually jumps in there to try to break up the fight. And what happens? Those two people fighting then turn their attention to the peacemaker and start pummeling them. You see, if you want to bring peace to the world around you, you're probably going to take some shots. I mean, that's what happened to Jesus, right? He came into this world to bring peace to his creation, to bring peace to us. And what do? Humanity ridiculed him. They drove a crown of thorns into his head and nailed him to the cross. He came to bring peace, which is something we're all after, and we killed him instead. You see, peacemakers are going to take shots, and we tend to think of the peacemaker as this hippie that's throwing flowers everywhere, that has no care in the world, but the reality is it takes guts to be a peacemaker. And we shouldn't be surprised that when we're pursuing peace, that we find ourselves in conflict. Because that's exactly where Jesus found himself. And he even says this in John chapter 15. He says, if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. We shouldn't be surprised when we try to bring peace, when we take peace, to find out that we get hit. Now, that doesn't mean that every time we bring peace, we're going to take a shot. That certainly wasn't the case for Jesus. But being a peacemaker isn't an easy life, but it is a meaningful life. And that's what Jesus is promising us. He's not promising us an easy life. No, he's saying, listen, if the world hated me, they're going to hate you too. I'm not inviting you to something easy. I'm inviting you to something meaningful. And the good life, the blessed life, isn't found when we have something easy. It's found when we have something meaningful. So be a peacemaker. See, next week we're going to dive a little bit more into what we should do when we take these shots, when we face this conflict. That's all of what the last beatitude is about. But for this week, well, here's what I want us to wrestle with. I want us to wrestle with and evaluate our lives and ask ourselves, are we being peacemakers? Are we being peacemakers? Are you throwing gas on the fire? Or are you throwing water? Are you making the problems worse? Or are you making the problems better? Think about that. Pray about that. Are you throwing gas on the fire or are you putting it out? That's what we need to wrestle with this week. Evaluate the parts of our life with your spouse. Are you being a peacemaker? Or are you elevating the conflict with your kids? Are you bringing peace and unity? Or are you pouring gas on the fire in your jobs, with your friends, with your neighbors? Are you being peacemakers? In your own life, are you accepting the peace that God has for you? Or are you living in turmoil? How about on social media? What about what you post? Is it being divisive? Is it throwing fuel on the fire, even if it's true? Would you say you're a peacemaker based on what you post online? We're called to be peacemakers. And right now, I say for me, I'm living in a season that's a lack of peace. There's not naturally peace around me. In the beginning, when we first kind of started on this, if I'm honest, I didn't do so well. I brought more gas than water. I started more fights than brought peace. Because looking at the things around me, the circumstances around me, I was like, how can I have peace when all this is going on and the stress and the angst and the fear got to me? And I wasn't being a good peacemaker. But as time went by, I learned a few things. I learned I can be at peace when everything around me is falling apart. I can find peace even when the world around me is in conflict. I learned that this commandment that Jesus gave, blessed are the peacemakers, doesn't require a peaceful world, a peaceful home, a peaceful life. What I've learned is that the peace of God transcends our circumstances. Listen, you can have peace regardless of what is going on in your life. Jesus isn't saying blessed are the peacemakers when they live in a calm world. No, he's speaking to a world that's rife with conflict. And if that's true for them, it's true for us too. You can have peace despite your circumstances, despite your stress, despite your job, despite politics, despite everything that's going on around you, you can have peace. And so I want to end by giving you 3 ways that you can find that peace. And these are 3 things that I've done over the past few months that have allowed me to experience peace in a season of life that's been anything but peaceful. And the first one is this. To find peace, you need to pray. And listen, I know that sounds cliche. Something you expect the pastor to say. You just need to pray more. But listen, it works. It does. Every morning I go for a walk and I spend the majority of that time in prayer. And there are some days where I skip. I'm too overwhelmed, too busy. The snow's coming down. It's really, really cold outside. So I decide to skip it and just get straight to work. And listen, on the days that I do that, I am miserable. The storms and the circumstances around me overcome me, and I cannot find peace no matter what I do. But on the days where I take time to connect with God, to pray with God, I have peace. Regardless of what happens around me or in my life, I can have that peace. And so listen, if you are starting to feel that lack of peace in your life, you need to find time to pray. Second thing you need to do is keep your eyes on Jesus. When our life starts falling apart, when we look at the divisiveness in our culture or the tension in our lives, we tend to start focusing on the problems, start focusing on everything that we need to do. And that just makes it worse. It pushes us further and further away from peace. And what we need to do is, instead of focusing on the storms, we need to focus on Jesus, the one who is greater than the storm. See, that's what Jesus promised us. He didn't promise us peace because we'd have a calm life. He promised us peace in the midst of storms. You see, peace is found not in the absence of storms, but in the presence of Jesus. So the next time that you feel that peace slipping away from you, focus your eyes like Peter did in the storm on Jesus, and you won't sink. It's when we take our eyes off him, we become like Peter, and we sink in the waves. So keep your eyes on Jesus. And the last thing we can do is stand for peace. Stand for peace. Jesus is calling us to be peacemakers, which means we actually have to do something. This is an action term. We have to bring peace to the world around us. And none of us are in a position, I don't think, to change the major problems in our world. But each of us have a sphere of influence that we can enter into, and we can bring peace to our families, to our kids, to our friends, to our neighbors, to our coworkers, to the people we hang out with. You have a sphere of influence where you can bring peace. And when you see people start to be divisive, start to bring disunity, it's our job to step in there and bring peace. To tell others, to show others that the peace we are experiencing, Jesus, is possible for them too. We need to point others to the ultimate peacemaker in Jesus. So, what are you going to do? What are you going to do this week, this month, this year? Are you going to be a peacemaker? Are you going to step into the peace that God has for you? Are you going to bring that peace to those around you? Are you going to bring water to the fire? Or are you going to keep pouring fuel on that fire? See, Jesus is telling us that the good life is found when we accept the peace of God and bring that peace to those around us. And it's up to us to decide how we are going to live. Are we going to be peacemakers in a world full of fighters? In a world full of tension? In a divisive world, in a split culture? Are we going to live differently? Are we going to bring the peace that Jesus has given to us to those around us? Spend some time today. Spend some time this week praying about